Hello, everyone. Welcome to Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session, Support Teams, Best Practices and Lessons Learned from USCCB. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Go ahead to the next slide, please. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there is a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. Please use the questions box and not the chat. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can try to assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. And this brings us to our presenters for today. Lisa Lundgren, Assistant Director of Community Sponsorship and Engagement at USCCB. Melissa Lukes, Refugee Community Sponsorship Program Developer at Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas. And I know Casey is unable to be here with us today, unfortunately. But our final presenter is Keegan Pyle, Community Sponsorship Manager at Catholic Charities Agency, Diocese of Springfield, Massachusetts. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you so much, Derek. We really appreciate it. And we're so happy to be with you here today. Again, my name is Lisa, and I work for Migration and Refugee Services at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, also known as USCCB, which is one of 9 national resettlement agencies in the United States. And today we have some incredible community sponsorship managers with us today from Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas and Catholic Charities Agency of Springfield. And we are all looking forward to sharing with you some of our best practices and lessons learned surrounding support teams. So I just wanted to go through the agenda really quick. First, we'd like to have a flash review, as I call it, of the definition of support teams, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then we'll go over some overall guidance on what makes for a successful support team. And I think many of you may be surprised that a lot of these recommendations are similar or almost identical to recommendations given to co-sponsorship groups. And then we'll hear from our from 2 excellent support team models, again at Kansas City and also Springfield, Massachusetts. And Melissa and Keegan are going to be talking a little bit about why and when they began their program, some of the commitments that some of the commitments that their support teams make, outreach and onboarding, as well as a little bit about program structure, training, follow-up, and also some challenges that they've encountered and some lessons learned. Last but not least, we want to leave time, as Derek said, for your questions. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of background information about where our models of support teams have emerged within our network. So since 2010, which I cannot believe has been over a decade, we've been promoting volunteerism and community engagement through a program that's known as POWER, which stands for Parishes Organized to Welcome Immigrants and Refugees. And this program for the last 3 or 4 years has been generously funded by LDS Charities. So through a competitive grant process, a number of resettlement agencies in our network each year are selected to receive both financial and technical assistance for both community and volunteer engagement projects. And applicants must develop projects that aim to advance the 3 goals that you see on the slide, which is increase in-kind and financial donations in favor of newcomers, involving individuals and community groups in accompaniment activities, which could range all the way from assisting in housing to transportation and mentoring, and also very important to strengthen community understanding of and support for refugees and immigrants. So increasingly, our applicants have been focusing on projects that match community groups with newcomers to provide support as they establish their new lives. And that's really where a lot of our experience has come with support teams. And I also just wanted to mention that some of the resettlement agencies in our network are also becoming very adept at seeking funding outside of USCCB and Power. For example, Melissa at Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas is the community sponsorship manager, thanks to a grant that they received from the Community Sponsorship Catalyst Fund. Next slide. So let's just quickly do our flash review of support teams. We've divided into two parts. The first one many of you will see is exactly the same as co-sponsors. It's when you have a community group that's paired with a newcomer by a resettlement agency. And what does that community group do? Well, they're committing to providing clearly defined volunteer activities as well as financial or in-kind contributions to a newcomer, individual, or family for a set period of time, usually from 3 months to a year. Now, the type of activities and the level of donations can vary, and we think this is excellent because it provides or allows for flexibility, and it allows resettlement agencies to tailor their support team programs to their local realities, their local needs, and the context on the ground. Next slide, please. Great. So for part 2 of the definition, this is really looking at the wide range of activities that support teams can be involved in. First and foremost, support teams deliver up to 7 of what are known as core services. Some of you may have been on one of the very first lunch and learns when Derek kindly explained to us what core services refers to. Those are the services that every refugee enrolled in the Reception and Placement Program or the Afghan Placement Assistance Program have a right to access during the first 30 to 90 days in their new community in the new country. Now, support teams are very enriching because in addition to the core services, many of them also provide what are known as wraparound services. While they are not core services, they're extremely valuable in making newcomers feel support and welcomed, and they're also very important for integration support as well. And you can see why some of the most common ones that our resettlement agencies delegate to support teams go from English language tutoring and conversation to community navigation to even assisting with the setting up of a bank account. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to give you a few basic guidelines for the making of a successful support team. I'm going to go over this very briefly because these are some of the same guidelines that you're going to be hearing from Melissa and Keegan when they explain their specific programs. And you'll also see that several or all of these are guidelines for co-sponsorship groups as well. So first and foremost, establish that support team coordinator within a resettlement agency. It's really important that it be full-time. It's so important that at least one individual can be completely focused on the identifying, the recruitment, the vetting, the training, the follow-up, and the monitoring of these support groups. These support groups do incredibly important work, and they deserve someone that's guiding them and training them. Second, have support teams sign a written agreement. Now, this isn't a requirement, but we do highly encourage it. And that's just because by having that written agreement, you're very clear with the support team about their responsibilities, their specific tasks, and they also see right there what the role of the resettlement agency is. It ensures buy-in and accountability as well. Now, it doesn't have to be as formal as an MOU, but again, a written agreement that just outlines those activities that the support team is going to be involved in is excellent. 3, ask support teams to establish a team leader or a couple of team leaders. Also important, just because it's really makes it really easy when you have that single point of contact that can be a liaison between all the members of the group and the resettlement agency. And I'm sure you'll hear that a little bit from Melissa and Keegan. 4, provide structure to support team groups. It's really helpful to provide structure in the sense that everyone has a specific role to play, and that's based on their interests and expertise. You can assign a specific activity or task. Many support teams will organize themselves into subgroups or subcommittees that are focused on specific areas, whether that's health or job coaching or English. And I know Keegan will talk a little bit about that in her presentation as well. 5, just a quick review. In addition to mandatory training, which we all know is so important, equally important is continual accompaniment and oversight of the support teams. That's when programs really thrive. And finally, just a reminder to widen your recruitment outreach, always thinking about being creative, reaching out to other groups. You can probably imagine that with the title of our program, Parishes Organized to Welcome Immigrants and Refugees, we put a lot of priority and reliance on parishes. But over the years, our resettlement agencies have been great about reaching out to many other community groups, especially other places of worship, whether those be mosques or synagogues or Christian churches of other denominations, ethnic community organizations, diaspora communities, you name it. So without further ado, I want to get to the part of the presentation that you've all been waiting for. Next slide, please. First, we're going to start with Melissa Lukes at Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas. And when she's done, we'll go to Keegan from Catholic Charities Agency of Diocese of Springfield. Thank you, Melissa.
Hello, I am Melissa Lukes. I'm the Community Sponsorship Program Developer at Catholic Charities of Northeast Kansas. A little background is we had received the Catalyst Fund in March of last year, so we've only been developing and implementing our program from about that time. We could go ahead to the next slide, please. So why be a community sponsor? We really want our community sponsors to not only provide some of those services to our families and help case management in different ways, but we also want them to be an ongoing person of support for the families, even after their official commitment has ended. So we tend to emphasize, like, we really want this to be a friendship building experience, but also helping them create those boundaries to where it doesn't create any word lines or anything like that as well. At the bottom is a few of our different community sponsors that have gone through, mostly with housing setups on those pictures, but they had quite a good time. Go ahead to the next slide. So we have 3 different levels of commitment that you could choose from. The first is our housing helper. This one is pretty hands-off as far as actually meeting the family and is meant to mostly get people's foot in the door. So they would collect all of the furniture for the housing setup for the family and then set it up. Optional, they can welcome the family at the airport to Kansas City. We haven't done this so much yet just because of COVID, but we are starting to see that dwindle down, and so we have had a little bit more interest coming in with that. The second level of commitment is a little bit outdated here. It has recently changed because we've updated it a bit. So they now, instead of collecting furniture, are collecting $500 to use towards initial groceries for the family. Winter clothing, so any coats for all family members regardless of the season that we're currently in, because we know if arrivals come in summer, it can be really challenging to get them coats when winter comes. And they are also creating a welcome basket for the families, and that can kind of include anything that they're wanting to include. We provide some guidelines, but we really like to describe that to groups as just things that make your house feel homey. So whether that's a fuzzy blanket or your favorite robe or a basketball, things like that. They then will spend 2 to 3 months completing a task once a week for at least an hour, ranging anything from setting up bank accounts to grocery shopping with the EBT card for the first time, getting clothing at our thrift store, doing bus training, going on a fun outing to like the zoo or somewhere else. And a few other tasks as well. Our third level of commitment is our most intensive, and it's for about 6 months. and they can choose either the advocate or mentor piece. The advocate is focused more so on like case management, employment support, transportation, things like that. So they would still do everything in the level 2 with the exception of the financial aspect. Instead of those items that we're asking level 2 for finances, we're asking level 3 for up to 6 months of rent and utility assistance. The mentor would provide the same amount of assistance, but instead would focus more on education, so cultural orientation, English classes, possibly job day, financial education, things like that. We could go ahead to the next slide. So our onboarding process, we typically will do some outreach with an informal presentation. Sometimes if groups reach out to me, I'll ask them to attend a presentation anyway, even if they kind of have a general idea, just so that they can get a better outline of what they'd be interested in and if this is the best fit for them. They will complete an application. It's one application per group. Designate that group lead on the application, and that should theoretically be the person that is communicating with me and the group and kind of being that liaison in between. They'll then sign an MOU that clearly outlines both of our responsibilities with the family. This has recently changed, so we'll see how this goes. Our first time doing this was yesterday. No, the day before yesterday, Saturday. So we're doing a half-day in-person training, and we're going to offer 2 sessions, a morning and an afternoon, so they can choose which one works best for them. And it includes topics that aren't so easily written in a manual that you could just reference. So things like empathy and what that looks like, confidentiality, boundaries, trauma-informed care, self-care, and then also transportation and car seat training. And I like to try and make these as interactive as possible. The empathy training, we go through the whole process of how a refugee arrives in the United States, and they get to practice trying to write their phone number in Nepali and trying to read postcards that are also written in Nepali and kind of experience what that might feel like for families. They'll read over and sign the community sponsorship manual that has some of the how-to on some of those tasks, like how to set up a bank account, how to buy food with food stamp card. And I think that'll be useful, we'll see, in that they can bring it with them if they're having trouble and go back and reference it in the moment. They'll get paired with a family based on either arrivals or need. The nice thing is that we're not limited to new arrivals, so we can kind of pair them with people that have been in the US for a little bit as well if needed. Then they'll complete all those activities and they'll submit their volunteer hours and donation records monthly. We could go to the next slide. All right, so this is just some pictures and names of the different groups that we've had. We've had quite a few people that have done that housing piece. That seems to be a very tangible thing that people like because people like to give items. So we've had a lot of interest in that one. And then we've had a few level 2 groups. Everyone that's out underlined is currently going through the process or currently involved. So our South Johnson County Settle Squad is what they've named themselves. That is the top right and bottom picture. They've been fantastic. They've done 4 level 1 moves, and then they've also sponsored 2 families at level 2 and are waiting for a 3rd now. So they really dove in really early and just kind of kept it going. And then we have our first level 3 group, which is going really well. They are providing the mentorship piece, so they're focused on like the English, cultural orientation, things like that. But they've also been really great about identifying additional needs for the family and connecting them with additional resources like culturally appropriate clothing for Ramadan and things like that. And next slide, but I think that might be the last one. Oh, best practices, challenges, and lessons learned. I think the things that we've learned the most as far as challenges and lessons learned include a lot of providing that guidance up front and really reiterating what your expectations are, as well as reiterating having one specific point person. We've recently changed the training that we're doing to that half day, because originally we were offering it on an online platform where people could go at their own pace, which was great for them, but then it would really hold up the process. And then you'd have people that got it done day one that were frustrated that they didn't get a family because somebody else in their group hasn't even started it. And so hopefully by having it in person, it'll just kind of mitigate all of that. Yeah, I think that's probably the main things for us. And that's all for me.
Thank you.
All right, am I up? Should I start?
Yes, Keegan. Thank you very much. Keegan from the Diocese of Springfield Catholic Charities Agency.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Derek, for organizing this presentation. My name is Keegan. I'm the Community Sponsorship Coordinator for Catholic Charities in Springfield, and I've been in this position for 6 years when Catholic Charities started resettling refugees back in 2016. And I'm also a Circle of Care co-leader. So it's really nice to be actually in a Circle of Care and bring that experience to this position. Next slide, please. So the numbers on here are a little bit out of date. It's just like a year off. So it's been 6 years this program has been going on, and we have 48 circles of care formed now, 43 that are active, and over 500 volunteers in our Circle of Care program. For our Circle of Care, we don't have there's no financial obligation for our Circles of Care. That said, and I tell them this during the orientation, they are welcome to help furnish apartments or give clothing or a vacuum cleaner or curtains or anything that the family might need. They can take them out to dinner or have them over for dinner. I tell the circles to treat their families like they would friends or family that moved into town. Where we tell them to draw the line is to not give them any cash or help them pay any bills. And that if people in their family are having a hard time paying bills or talk to them about money issues, to direct them to the caseworker. So we don't ask the Circles of Care to help with rent or bills or any financial things like that. As far as recruitment, we started off in 2016 doing house parties, and people would invite us to their house and they'd invite their friends, and we'd do a whole kind of educational spiel about refugee resettlement and our program, and then people would sign up, and that's how we got started. But we haven't had to do that for years, just because of word of mouth has really kind of taken off around here. So we have people contacting us all the time now, interested in wanting to be part of a Circle of Care. I'm going to say probably we have 48 Circles of Care, and about 12 of them are through congregations, and the rest are not through congregation. There's some neighborhood groups or groups of friends or individuals who approach me, and then I put them together as a Circle of Care. Next slide, please. So this just lists all of the things that that our Circles of Care help with, and some of them are RNP services, and a lot of them aren't. As Lisa mentioned earlier, there's a lot of wraparound services that our circles do. So the way that we set up the circles is there's a leader or co-leaders, 2 or 3 co-leaders, and then at least 6 to 10 people per circle. There are a couple circles that have like 18 or 20 people in them, but they're helping large families. So it works out that way. And if a circle is matched with a family that's larger, I always ask them if they need additional volunteers, and I'll bring additional volunteers to their circle. But we ask them to do a lot of things, and here's a list of some of them. And at the last slide, it shows a checklist of all the things we ask Circles of Care to do. So it's really community navigation and orientation, but it's also things like being the liaison between the school and the parents while the parents are learning English and feeling more comfortable with accessing the school. Healthcare, not just taking them to healthcare appointments, but teaching them how to make their own healthcare appointments, connecting them with a dentist. So many things, everything you'd imagine doing if you moved someplace new and needed to learn about the community you're living in. Additionally, there's things like having 1 or 2 people in the circle go by twice a month to teach the people how to identify important mail versus non-important mail and teach them how to pay bills. So there's community navigation and community orientation, but also teaching them skills that they need in order to be self-sufficient and independent here. Next slide, please. So as far as the program structure, like I said, our circle size is at least 6 people before they can be a circle. The average size is 10. We asked for a 1-year commitment. When I started this program 6 years ago, I actually asked for a 5-year commitment. And believe it or not, people still signed up for it, including my circle. We're on year 5 right now. But I changed it from 5 years to 1 year about a year ago. And that's because we were seeing some cases of families becoming kind of overly dependent on the circles and the volunteers. So my hope is that by limiting the commitment to 1 year and really emphasizing teach rather than help, that they will teach the family members they're working with how to do things on their own or how to access the resources they need rather than doing it for them perpetually. So we have a 1-year commitment now. And I do recommend that circles, once they're formed, they meet on their own and people volunteer for task categories. So healthcare, transportation, education, food. I have a whole list of categories. And that's helpful because the volunteers in the circle know what they're responsible for. If it's transportation, those 2 or 3 people can learn the bus routes in the area instead of everybody in the circle having to. It's also helpful for the leaders because not everything is on the leaders. The leaders can choose to be part of a category or they can just be a leader and organize meetings and be the liaison between them and us. And it's really helpful for the family because when the family arrives, they get a booklet that the circle made that has a photo and a phone number and a name and also the category that they're responsible for. So as the family gets to know the circle, they can contact Keegan if they have a question about food, or they can contact Lisa if they have a question about healthcare. So it makes it, we have found that makes it easier for everyone involved. As far as training, I do an orientation probably once every 2 weeks. Right now we're doing it via Zoom. Before COVID, it was in person. And right now it's individuals. So individuals come into the Zoom, into the meeting, the orientation, and I do an orientation, blanket orientation for all of them. And then at the end, I say, now we need a leader. After I've already explained what leaders do and what the roles of everybody. And remarkably, somebody steps up. 2 or 3 people step up to be a leader. So in that moment, this is what I'm doing now. This is after with parishes and with people who come together as a group, it's a little bit different because they usually have a leader already identified. But with individuals who come in, they're all there brand new. And then I say, who wants to be the leader? And then once somebody says, I'm the leader, I'm like, good, I'm going to be in touch with you. I'm going to send a follow-up email to everybody, but then the leaders take it from there. And this is really a remarkable process to watch because it's strangers who come together and who don't know each other. And then they meet without me and they assign each other roles. And then they really get to know each other and form their own community. They have barbecues together. They have barbecues with the family and the circle. So it's really, I found it's really a fun thing to watch. People get to know each other as well. There's a lot that we covered in the orientation. I'm not going to go over it all, but a lot of it is what Melissa said also, just about respect and empathy and the history of refugees, who a refugee is, where they're coming from, big picture refugee resettlement, all the way down to micro, what are we doing? What are we doing today? What are we doing now? I do have monthly leaders meetings every month for the past 6 years. They know it's the second Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And now we're up to, I think, 68 leaders. So it's a big meeting. Thankfully, right now it's on Zoom. I'm not sure how we're going to do it once it's in person again. But those leader meetings are really helpful because circles can bring their questions, resources they found, best practices, and all the leaders can share them. And then they take that information back to their circles. So that's really helpful. Next slide, please. Okay, so challenges. As I mentioned, I did reduce the commitment from 5 years to 1 year, and I think that's really going to be helpful. Anybody who's worked with volunteers and refugees, I think you'll have experienced the same thing I do, which is that the people who volunteer to do this are very excited to work with people. They're very enthusiastic to help in every way they can, and that's wonderful. And we want those people, and I love those people, and it's part of the reason I love this job so much. And it can be, in my experience, it can be challenging to create clear boundaries around what they are, what they're here to help with, what the responsibilities of the circle is, and to not overstep boundaries. And in my experience, that comes into play a lot with money. Understandably, new arrivals here are really concerned about money, whether it's their SNAP benefits or their mass health or their rent. And so they're talking to everybody about it. They're talking to caseworkers about it. They're talking to volunteers, anyone who will listen to them. And even though in orientation, I'm very clear about not getting involved with matters of money, it's really hard for people to stay away from that. So I'm constantly talking to circle members about not getting in over their heads, not only because of privacy and respect for the family, but also to prevent burnout. If people take on the well-being of the families they're working with 100%, which some personalities just do, they're going to get burnt out. So at leaders meetings, we talk a lot about that. How's everybody doing? If there's some feeling of burnout, we kind of go over what they're doing and try to reestablish the boundaries. Yeah, and so this is a list, a sample list, a checklist of the things we ask people to do and within certain time frames. And that's it. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Keegan.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa and Melissa and Keegan, and thank everyone, for being here. We're now going to be going to answering some questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions panes, in your attendee control panel. I do see that there is one, and they are asking if it's possible to have if you would be willing to share your PowerPoint for training co-sponsors and support groups. If you want to do it via email to everyone, you can just email it to me if you want to forward it, or if you just want to do it like on a case-by-case basis. If you'd prefer them to reach out to you directly, I can make sure to include your email in that email to everyone, and people can reach out to you individually and and talk about that. Is that how you prefer to do it? Just kind of one-on-one basis like that?
That sounds good for me. Definitely.
Yeah, I think that'll work for me as well, because I have different presentations for different pieces. So if there's a particular section you're interested in. Great.
Let's see. It looks like we're getting a few more questions in the questions tab. Give me just a second here. Okay. One question is, what sort of vetting and background checks do you do for each team member? Could you talk a little bit about background checks and the vetting process?
I'll go, and then Melissa can chime in too. So we have everybody complete a Corey background check, and we also have them sign 2 codes of conduct that just kind of lists, respectful ways to communicate and treat other volunteers and the people they're working with. And then we also have them take an online course through the diocese. So those are that's the paperwork that we request, as well as an MOU from every circle of care. But as far as background checks, it's a standard Corey background check.
Yeah, we have all of the individuals, except for level 1 typically, since they're not actually interacting with the family in most cases. But those that are interacting with the families will do the Virtus Protecting God's Children training, which also includes a background check in that.
Yeah, and I can just talk just kind of generally with most refugee resettlement agencies and local offices. There tends to be the general rule that if a volunteer or support team member, co-sponsor group member is having direct contact with a client and or will have access to confidential information about a client, that they tend to be required to have a background check of some form. But oftentimes, you know, if you just want to donate a couch, you don't need a background check to do it. So that kind of stuff makes sense. But good questions for sure. I'm gonna go to the next one here. Do you conduct some sort of exit meeting or survey questions for the team or debriefing perhaps, or something like that when they're done?
We don't do that, and it's really because for us there doesn't feel like there's a end date specifically, and it's really because so far all the circles that we've worked with, they just kind of carry on as friends with the family. So even though they might have taught the family how to do specific things, specific tasks at certain times, there's not like okay, by June 1st of 2022 you're done. But it would be an interesting, one of the things I put on the slide that I didn't mention that I would like to do is create a more thorough evaluation tool for this program. And so I could see it being helpful to say at some point, whether it's after a year or whether that you've taught XYZ to the family, kind of going back and evaluating how everything's gone. I would like that for the circle, for the volunteers, and also for the family.
Yes, so we have attempted to do this. It's kind of 50-50 as to if it gets filled out. We have like a pre and post survey and a satisfaction survey to kind of gauge like knowledge and feelings about refugees as a whole. Things like, would you ever contact your state representative? Have you learned something about yourself? Things like that, as well as what can we do better? And what I found is a lot of our groups that will just continue to do things with families and continue to be involved, they're more likely to fill that out and give us feedback. But then the ones that are like, oh, I got in over my head, this actually isn't for me, will not fill that out, which is kind of, in a weird sense, counterproductive because they're the ones that we need to hear from. So we're still trying to figure out the best way to do that. And I'm definitely open to suggestions if anyone has any.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's just from our perspective at Refugee Welcome Collective. That's maybe something that we could try to help with or look into in terms of evaluations and some ideas on how to help community sponsor staff working with community groups, support teams, and community sponsors. How to do those debriefing meetings and what kinds of information would be of value to them. So I'm just keeping a mental note of that. I think that's a good thing. We will look into how we can be supportive of that across all networks. One of the other questions here are, what are your thoughts about how this model impacts service equity? So I don't know exactly whether or not I'm fully understanding the question, but perhaps this person is asking something about, because I know it comes up sometimes in other ways. How do we deal with the fact that some clients get matched with a co-sponsor group or a support team or volunteer and others don't? And how do we deal with issues of equity in that way? So I don't know, any thoughts? I don't know for sure that that's what they were getting at, but that's just a question. And if I'm misreading that question, please write in the questions tab for a little clarification. But I was wondering your thoughts about that, dealing with equity kind of as an agency, making sure that all clients have access and equity of services.
Well, I know this isn't perfect, and Melissa and Keegan can chime in, but one small way we try to work on that equity is to encourage resettlement agencies to prioritize families that do not have U.S. ties, or maybe they have U.S. ties, but there's a lot of family members, because you just know they're going to need that extra community support that, ideally with the U.S. tie, they're going to have automatically. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Melissa or Keegan.
We actually ran into this not too long ago, because we had a family that we had paired with a sponsor, and then the family's brother came with his family. And so for that one, which this of course can't always happen, we ended up actually reaching out to the community sponsor and being like, would you be willing to also take the brother's family? So they, that's our level 3 group, and they're great and are currently helping 17 people, because both of them were very large families.
Yeah, so we provide a circle of care for every free case that we resettle. And the only time that we provide a circle for a U.S. tie is if the U.S. tie is totally not involved in helping. For everyone we resettle, we provide through a different program. The Circles of Care don't do this, but we have a donations program and a whole other moving group of donations for volunteers. So we fully furnish the apartments of everybody that we resettle. So everyone gets the same amount of financial help and in-kind donation help. Where I can see there being some sensitivity or concerns about equity is if one circle of care might be just more involved or more giving, or sometimes they'll raise money in their circle to pay back their travel loan, and not all circles can do that. So that is always a concern if families are communicating with each other and they're like, wait, you got your travel loan paid for and I didn't. We haven't had any families come to us and say that yet, but it is a concern. That said, the people that we resettle, I'm sure this is the case everywhere, they're in communication with friends and family all over the country who are experiencing different forms of resettlement and support. So they're not only comparing it to their own experience and their neighbor's own experience, but to experience, from friends who are resettled in Texas and everything. So sometimes we'll hear, oh, my cousin got this, that, or the other, and why aren't we? And we just have to say, it's different. It's different for everybody, and we're all doing our best to support you how we can. But it is a concern, and you're right, Derek, it comes up every time I talk to any kind of community sponsorship coordinator. It's a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone was asking, and I think maybe they misheard what they said, MLU. I'm assuming we're talking about MOUs, which just means a memorandum of understanding. It's a written agreement or a document. Basically just a formalized written agreement amongst organizations, between the organization and the circle group or the sponsor or the support group or something like that. Let's see if there are some others. Do you work with Lutheran social services, and if so, how?
We don't. We have in Springfield, we have 2 other resettlement agencies, Jewish Family Services and Essentia, and who resettle refugees, but we don't really work with them in this model. They have their own volunteer models.
Yeah, we have Delalam and Jewish Vocational Services as the other resettlement agencies just across the state line, also still in Kansas City. And so we'll sometimes collaborate with them if either of us are asking for advice on different ways that they've done different approaches for things, or if we have families that are moving across the state line, or if we have volunteers that contact one of us but they're actually on the other side of the state line, but otherwise we don't really collaborate too much.
And then on the national level, LRAS, the Lutheran Immigrants and Refugee Services, they're a fellow national resettlement agency, so we're very collaborative with them. We'll be working with them even more through the Refugee Welcome Collective and Derek, and also there's an RCUSA community sponsorship subgroup where we're both as well as the other national resettlement agencies, very engaged. So there is a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. I was about to say the same thing, certainly at that level. And I know at individual sites too, I know there are lots of opportunities sometimes to collaborate, across different RAs, and LRS being one, and CWS or HIAS or USCCB, all the others as well, that work collaboratively whenever possible. And we're going to wrap up here in just a minute, but I wanted to see if there are any others. There's a are you geographically limited to specific states or specific communities? How does that work?
About specific states, I don't know. We've never had to work with resettlement outside of Massachusetts, but we aren't restricted as far as towns or communities. We're actually expanding, going into more and more towns, just because the housing situation is so dire right now, and with the Afghans, all the Afghans that we resettled over the past 6 months, we've had to broaden our search for housing. So we're moving into counties that we've never been in before. And so there's no restriction, at least for us, there's no restrictions about where we can go.
We have sort of the opposite of that, because we have the 2 resettlement agencies just across the state line. So we are the Kansas City, Kansas side, all the way up to Wichita or Topeka. I always misspeak. It's one of those 2. So we'll go anywhere from KCK west of that, which is about like a 3-hour drive time between the 2. And then from there, further west into Kansas is international IRC.
Yeah, and on a national level, Derek, please, I don't know if you want to chime in about how it works with the national resettlement agencies, that we work out which states we'll be in through our funder, which is the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration.
Yeah, that's great. There are, sometimes, like we've talked about, multiple RAs or resettlement agencies and or local affiliate offices, sometimes in the same city, sometimes sort of generally in different parts of the same city, and sometimes throughout the state in different ways. And there are, I know, some places where they can operate some community groups across state lines. There are some opportunities like that. I think, for example, like New Jersey into New York and things like that. Maybe there are other places that have opportunities to do that. One of the person who had asked that equity question earlier said that, yeah, I was on the right side of that, or general understanding, but also wondering about, so for non-refugee cases, for asylum seekers perhaps, or asylees, do your all programs provide those circles or those support teams for non-refugee clients, for refugee or for asylum seekers, for example, or other immigration statuses?
Melissa, do you want to go? I feel like I'm always going first.
Yeah, that's fine. So we can, to some extent. So as a general rule of thumb, our resettlement programs just will not serve asylum seekers until they're granted asylum, aside from our legal clinic. So aside from our legal clinic, we've just kind of kept that across the board and are applying that to community sponsorship as well. But once they're granted asylum, we could provide support. So we kind of base it the same way as we would with a refugee family, as far as what their community support already looks like, what their needs are, what level of support that family would need, because a lot of our asylum grantees have already established housing and are already working, or have a way to find work and things like that. And so a level 1 where they're furnishing a house may not be the best option for that individual. So depending on what level of support they need, and then what our groups are interested in, seeing if we can make that match.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat with Melissa. We provide circles of care to clients that we serve as refugees, with the exception of the Afghans that just arrived, the APA cases, because they don't have refugee status. But there's also an organization here that works specifically with asylum seekers. And if they need help, and so they have their own volunteers, but sometimes if they need help, they'll reach out. So we'll work collaboratively. And if I have volunteers who are interested in working with them, we'll work together to help cases. But we provide circles specifically for the clients, the refugee clients that come through Catholic Charities.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap it up because we're getting close to the end of the hour. I want to make sure people, are able to take bathroom breaks and things before their next meetings at 1 o'clock. I do want to just touch on one last one that just asks, is there a way to connect more regularly as support group and community sponsorship coordinators and staff outside of these webinars? I just want to touch on that because that is something that we're thinking about and trying to figure out, communities of practice. Can we figure out ways to connect co-sponsorship staff across the country so that there are open lines of communication and kind of encouraging people to talk about best practices and what issues are coming up, as well as an opportunity perhaps for community members, for volunteers and support groups across the country to kind of come together and say, oh yeah, we're doing this kind of stuff here in Miami. Oh yeah, we're doing this kind of stuff there in Lincoln, Nebraska, and people, talking and sharing stories and things like that too. So we're looking into that. Please keep us in mind. We're thinking about those ways to figure out how to do that. I did just want to thank so much everyone for attending today, and of course to our presenters. Thank you so much for your expertise and for sharing your information. I just want to thank everyone again for coming, being a part of the RWC Lunch and Learn series. If you have any other questions, you can contact, you can go to the next slide, please. You can contact info@refugeewelcome.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, as well as descriptions of more upcoming RWC Lunch and Learns. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.